Hello and welcome. My name is Jenna Cockworth, Associate Director, Alumni Relations at Washington University. And I'm excited to welcome our alumni, parents, current students, and friends to today's webinar, The Psychology of Money, featuring Bradley Basker. So before we begin, I'd like to explain the format for today's session. You will only hear and see me and our presenter, and the webinar will last about 40 minutes. Following the webinar, we will have plenty of time for questions, and we encourage you to participate by asking questions through the Q&A option. To do that, type a question in the Q&A box at any time during the talk. And thank you to everyone who has already submitted questions through the registration. During the Q&A, we will get to as many questions as we can, and please note the webinar is being recorded. So it's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome Bradley Basker. Bradley is a 2014 WashU graduate and a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley in Boston. He works with clients to help build a sustainable financial plan and manage their investable assets to achieve their financial and life goals. At WashU, he studied finance and marketing at the Olin Business School. And professionally, Bradley worked as a management consultant at PwC in Boston before transitioning to the financial services industry. Bradley is licensed in Connecticut, Florida, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Texas. In his spare time, he coaches his middle school boys basketball team and volunteers in various capacities in the greater Boston community. Bradley has been delivering webinars focused on financial wellness and literacy to companies, synagogues, schools, public libraries, and the WashU Alumni Network, of which this is his second event. He lives in Brookline with his wife, Eliza, and his newborn daughter, Abigail. So please join me in welcoming Bradley Basker.
Thanks, Jenna. I appreciate you so much for giving me the platform to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Bradley Basker. I'm a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley, and I'm so grateful to all of you for taking the time out of your busy days. And with everything that's going on around us, it really means a lot that you're here and you're prioritizing your financial well-being. As Jenna mentioned, we're going to be talking today about the psychology of money and taking a rational approach to managing your wealth. I think with everything that's been going on, there's been such an emphasis on spiritual well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, but financial well-being is something that unfortunately has taken a back seat for many people until ultimately it comes to the forefront when, God forbid, you lose your job or you have to take care of a loved one who gets sick with COVID or something like that. And so my goal here today is to talk about the psychology of money and make sure you get your mind right when you start to think about your own personal finances and your own situation. And so today we're going to talk about your relationship with your wealth and how your perceptions, biases, and emotions about money can affect the financial decisions that you make. And so when you understand this complex dynamic and developing strategies for making objective decisions, it'll help you manage your wealth more wisely. So today we're going to cover a number of topics. And again, we'll hopefully get through the material in about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. So we'll first start talking about your relationship with money. Then we'll transition to spending some time discussing how emotions might affect some of your money habits, not just your own, but perhaps those of your children, your siblings, your parents, your grandparents. These often tend to be intertwined with people close to you. Finally, we'll cover some strategies for changing the way that you think, feel, and act about money. And we'll talk about how working with someone professionally perhaps can help you develop and stick to a plan for managing your wealth in a manner that is goals-based rather than emotion-driven. So let's dive right in and begin by talking about your relationship with money. So wealth is without a doubt a complex concept. And I want to make sure wealth doesn't necessarily mean wealthy. It doesn't mean you have to be a millionaire, multimillionaire. Wealth just means sort of the money that you have to your name. And so regardless of kind of what your circumstances are, wealth is a complex concept. And your own personal relationship with money might be complicated. In many families, money is a taboo topic. Talk of money might bring up a range of complicated feelings like anxiety, embarrassment, guilt, envy, insecurity, or even shame. Different families have different approaches to having this conversation. I grew up in a family where I was acutely aware of my family's finances. My parents talked about it. We always used to say money doesn't grow on trees. And I knew what, high school cost. I knew what WashU education cost. And so I was very much aware of that. Whereas in my wife's family, she was a little bit more insulated and they didn't talk about it as much. She was able to kind of go through life not talking about money as sort of more of a taboo topic. And so in addition to that, it might also call into question what money means to you, and your understanding of its significance might be intertwined with deeply held perceptions you have about love, control, independence, accomplishment, identity, self-esteem, self-worth, right? There's many different ways that people associate their wealth and their money. And so we're trying to get a grip today on kind of how you approach your personal finances. And sort of once you establish what the current state situation is, then you can kind of make a plan for how you're going to mitigate that going forward. And relating to money is just as important as relating to the people that you care about. It requires time and effort to understand its implications and to find the proper place for it in your life. And so you're probably laughing and saying, you know, it's not just as important as sort of my friends and family, but the reality is, for better or for worse, money does play a role in all of our sort of parts of our life. And you want to invest the same amount of time, you know, as you would in a relationship with a family member or a friend, as you do sort of cultivating and fostering your relationship with your own personal situation. So for those of you that are familiar with the 5 love languages, the next topic is kind of something that's very, very similar. And so money management habits, from what I've seen and what's been done in various research analyses, is that money management habits tend to fit into 5 financial personality categories. And if we were in the same room right now, I'd ask people to raise their hands after and tell me what they think, you know, they fit into in terms of a primary bucket. But I want to talk about these 5. And once you start to think introspectively about maybe which of these apply to you most, or 1 or 2 apply to you most, you could start to think about an approach for how to, again, get a grip on how to, you know, better, think about how you handle your money. So the first category is what we call spenders. Spenders believe that money is meant for spending. Sometimes they spend more money than they should, or they live above their means because they get caught up in the moment, or they see something that they absolutely have to have. You're a spender if you're someone that walks in the mall and you go by a bunch of different windows and you say, I have to have it, or that outfit looks incredible, I need to have it right now, or I need to have that newest iPhone. Before even thinking about the implications of that comment, you're just someone that says, listen, money's meant to be spending. You only live once. That's how you approach things. So that's the spender. The next one is the saver. The saver loves to get a good deal, and often savers are less focused on material possessions, but they like to sort of think about, you know, the rainy day in the future, making sure that they have something. And, you know, that's someone that likes to clip coupons, perhaps go on something like Groupon, loves to get a good deal. I myself probably consider myself to be a saver. I love the feeling I get, you know, when I get a good deal, or when I see something's 50% off, or going shopping on Black Friday. So I would say I'm probably a saver. The next one is risk-averse personalities, and those people place security and planning as their top concerns. They prefer proven safe investments and like to plan and view money as a tool that generates security. So these are the people that are constantly asking themselves, what if I lose my job? You know, what if the market corrects and it goes down? What if, there's a natural disaster that happens in the world? Those are the types of questions that get asked by someone who's risk averse, because they sort of don't like to live in a world that is filled with risk. The next one is gamblers. Gamblers are willing to take big risks for potentially big payoffs. They're the type of people that might say, you got to risk it for the biscuit, if you've heard that saying. And they're driven more by optimism and gut feeling rather than details and analysis. So not surprisingly, a gambler is someone who perhaps at a roulette table saying, you know, black has been hot, black's hit 5 straight times, I have a feeling it's going to be black again, right? Versus just going off of the fact that it's really a 50-50 chance it's black or red. And so gamblers are those kinds of people that just sort of go high upside, and they don't necessarily consider the fact that things could go awry. And then the final financial personality type that you might fit into is what we call the flyers. The flyers are best described as people who simply don't think about money at all. I would say my mother-in-law has told me she is a flyer. She just sort of sees money as a mechanism to get from A to B. She just uses it, you know, to kind of get through life, but she doesn't think about the implications. She doesn't think about, you know, whether there's going to be money tomorrow or in the future. She just sort of cruises through life relying on my father-in-law or her husband to deal with that. So again, I'd like you to kind of think introspectively right now, which personality type do you feel like you fit into? And once you kind of get a grip on that, your financial personality type will affect your relationship with money and the decisions that you make about how to spend, save, and invest it. So again, this is just sort of an opportunity for you to think about it, talk to your partner if you have one, your spouse, your family, ask them kind of which of these 5 you think they fit into. But no matter what your financial personality type is, there may be times in your life where you experience financial stress. According to the 2019 Employee Financial Wellness Survey by my former employer, PwC, which does this every year, 2/3 of all employees are stressed about their finances. And I always like to joke and say, you know, what's up with that other third? I wonder if they're all just heirs to multi-million-dollar inheritances, because it's hard to envision a world where you're just not stressed at all about your finances in some form or fashion. It's hard to avoid talking or thinking about money because it is so involved in, you know, our day-to-day lives and kind of getting to where we want to go. Now, not surprisingly, preparing for retirement is a major contributor to financial stress. And according to the same survey, 59% of employees indicated that money matters are their biggest cause of stress, above everything else, above terrorism, homeland security, social security, LGBT, right? All these different things that you might think about, money matters are the #1 cause of financial stress. It makes sense. It's hard to avoid that conversation. And then going even deeper, more than 1/3 of employees say that they worry about their personal finances at work, and half of those employees say they spend more than 3 hours every day at work thinking about their own personal finance situation. So think about that productivity drain that's happening at work when you're spending time thinking about, your personal financial situation. And so if you can get yourself in a situation where you're a little bit more calm, relaxed, you feel like you've got a plan in place, perhaps you can take your mind off of money and have a little bit better of a psychological state when it comes to thinking about that. For many people, there is an emotional connection between money and safety and security and self-worth. And financial stress can have adverse consequences, especially to your health. And exploring your relationship with money and understanding how your emotions with money affect the decisions you make can help alleviate that financial stress so you can focus on managing your wealth wisely to help achieve your financial goals and not thinking about, what if this doesn't work out? What if I'm going down the wrong path? You've got a plan in place. You'll sort of be in the right state of mind to make wise decisions. And so think about some of those emotions and situations on the slide, right? Anxiety, insomnia, lying awake at night, thinking about, am I going to be able to pay my rent or, make sure I have enough to put food on the table for my kids, right? Marital conflict is another one that I think is really important and gets overlooked. Money can be a huge sort of strain on a relationship when you start to think about perhaps different people are on different pages and you want to make sure you are aligned and in sync when it comes to that. So now we've kind of set the stage for, who you might be and some of the things that we see other people out there across the country are experiencing. Let's talk about how emotions affect money habits. And let's face it, we aren't particularly rational creatures when it comes to money. In fact, the full range of emotions, guilt, sadness, anger, happiness, can help or hurt your financial decision making. So money is an emotional topic. So for example, think about this right now. How do you feel when you see your bank account balance is running low? Or perhaps you start to see that account balance start to go down as opposed to go up. Perhaps you're spending more than you're bringing in every month. It probably doesn't feel so good. You probably, start to have these strong feelings and perhaps blame money for being the cause of all your problems. But on the flip side, what if I told you that you found out you won the lottery? You probably might find that a sudden large sum of money might change the way you feel and act. You might start walking with a little bit more of a pep in your step. You might even see that it changes the way people treat you, right? And that might feel good. And so clearly the way, our own personal financial circumstances are going to dictate kind of how we approach the rest of our lives. But the reality is no matter how much money you have, money can evoke strong emotions. And often these emotions are tied to deeply held and often subconscious beliefs about money. But where do our feelings about money come from? Your feelings, beliefs, and attitudes about money may stem from your childhood. How your parents handled money often provides the foundation for how you handle money. For those of you that grew up in a household where you talked about money, or you're sort of aware of how your family's finances were, you might have a different perspective, perhaps to someone in your life that grew up not having to worry about that or being insulated from it. So clearly how you grew up and how your parents sort of educated you is going to play a role in that. The next thing that might add up is your feelings about money might be influenced by your education. For most people, I say most people, perhaps not everyone, I don't know what schools out there perhaps are not like this, but their formal schooling did not include financial education, which leaves them without the basic tools to create a financial roadmap. So one of the things that I'm trying to do back in my old high school is ask them to put some sort of curriculum in place, which I'm happy to deliver, to talk to rising graduating high school seniors just about basic personal finance tips so that they don't get into the real world, saddled with a lot of debt and having no idea kind of how to manage their own personal finances. But for many schools and for many people, you can't really rely on your education to kind of learn some of these finance habits that I'm talking about. And I know at WashU, they do have a personal finance class in the business school. And for those of you that had the opportunity to take it, I'm sure you're grateful that you did. And the way that you feel about money may also be shaped by your conceptions or misconceptions about money. For example, you may have heard the phrase, you need money to make money. You look at people that you say they've been successful only because they had a lot of money to begin with. But the reality is a little bit of money can turn into a lot of money if you have the right approach and the right mentality and mindset. And so when you examine and understand your feelings, beliefs, and attitudes about money, it's going to be really an important first step to not only making more rational, informed decisions about your money, but also imparting good money habits one day on your kids if you decide to have those. Now, your emotions can have a powerful impact on your spending. And let's talk about a few of these emotions. And it's important to understand how each of these kind of impact some of the decisions that you make. The first one is sadness. There's a reason that they call shopping retail therapy, because buying things can make you feel better, at least temporarily. Sadness often increases the amount of money that you're willing to spend, and more likely to give up a larger benefit in the future to have that smaller benefit now. We always joke about, I'm going to go eat a pint of ice cream because I'm so upset. Well, in the same way, sometimes you'll go and just spend something that you really didn't mean to spend. And, when the dust settles, you realize maybe you shouldn't have done that just because it makes you feel better. So if that's something that perhaps happens to you, kind of understand why that happens and think about ways that you can put yourself in a position to not sort of let that sadness overcome you. The next one is anger. Angry people tend to take bigger risks and dig their heels in when their choices are questioned, even if they made the mistake. Right? Think about it, right? When you get angry, you start tensing up, you end up making decisions that you look back on and you regret because you weren't thinking clear. You kind of had a little bit of a muddled brain. The next one is fear. Fear can play a big role in your financial life. For example, the fear of running out of money in retirement can motivate you to save. I would say that's good fear. Or the fear of leaving your loved ones unprotected can motivate you to buy insurance. I would say that's also perhaps good fear, right? Protecting yourself in the event of something crazy happens. But fear might also lead you to exaggerate risk or second guess yourself, causing you to abandon your original plan of action. So when we talk about putting a plan in place, having a financial plan, having a life plan, right? If you're always fearful about what if, you might very quickly jump the shark when something doesn't go immediately according to plan. And so we want to make sure that you don't let fear completely overcome you. The next one is guilt. We feel guilt when we violate our internal standards. So for example, if you value your family and family time, but spend too much time working, you might feel guilty and try to make up for that, with lost time, make up the lost time with expensive gifts. So I know I used to travel every day, every week, Monday to Thursday, week after week. And I remember I used to feel very guilty about not being around all the time for my girlfriend, who became my fiance, now my wife. And so I would often come back with flowers or gifts just to kind of put a Band-Aid on it because I sort of had that guilt. When in reality, there were other ways that perhaps I could have made that better, like perhaps finding a job that was more satisfying, which is what I'm doing now. And then the last one, which I think is the healthiest emotion that affects spending, is feeling gratitude. Feeling thankful can reduce economic impatience and help you delay gratification. So if you feel like you're grateful for what you have now, you don't feel like you sort of need to pile on in the short term, knowing that perhaps one day you won't have as much as you need, and therefore you're gonna have that nest egg ready to go. So I think if all these five, this probably goes without saying, gratitude is a very healthy emotion to have. And if you feel like you have everything that you need, you're less likely to make decisions that you regret in the future. But having said all that, and having said sort of don't let money overtake everything that you do, we do all need money to live. And sometimes money can make life easier and more comfortable or provide access to better services. But the pursuit of money can become ineffective if you allow it to consume everything that you do and all the things that you think about. And so here are some common pitfalls to accumulating long-term wealth. The first one is confusing high income with high wealth. Having a high income, making a big salary is all well and good, but it doesn't guarantee wealth, especially if you also have a high amount of debt, right? When building long-term wealth, your debt is just as, if not more important than your income, because the truly wealthy have a high income and have low debt. And so what I mean by that is this: if you're someone that perhaps makes, let's say, $2,000 every single month, but every single month you spend $2,000, you're making good money, but you're not putting any away into the future, not accumulating wealth, because you're essentially spending what you're bringing in. And so, you might look at someone, a friend of yours, and say, wow, they're making good money. But if they're staying at a lavish, apartment, and you just see them going wild and going on crazy vacations, you might even be wealthier than they are because you're putting more away even on a lower income. So again, don't confuse high income with high amount of wealth. The next one is being driven by materialism and consumerism, trying to keep up with the Joneses. You may have heard that saying, right? Looking over your shoulder and saying, okay, my friend has the newest iPhone. My friend has a 75-inch TV. My friend just bought a home, so I need to do that. Because when you do that, you start to have a sense of overspending and an over-reliance on debt and credit, which can derail your goal of achieving long-term wealth. Another one is using money as a form of validation. So sometimes we do feel better about ourselves when we have the latest iPhone or walk around in designer labels. But those feelings of validation are typically transient and short-lived and can lead to a never-ending cycle of spending and short-term validation. It's not going to sort of give you that long-term fulfillment, something that's going to be short-term, it's going to fade, and you're going to look back and say, maybe perhaps it wasn't so important to have those material goods. And then finally, I'll skip to the fifth one and just say, needing instant gratification. Many of us, I don't know how old everyone is on this call, but many of us grew up in an era of the digital age where we could Venmo someone instantaneously, we can do Uber Eats, have food at our door in 30 minutes, we can Amazon Prime something and have it on our doorstep in 2 hours. So we've got this need for instant gratification that perhaps the generations before us did not. And so we're hardwired to want things and to want them now. And instant gratification is a powerful force, but the need for it can be detrimental to your long-term financial health. So again, kind of try to avoid that instinct of like, I need to have this, I need to have it now, because you can click that button and it's non-refundable and the money's out the door and you can't take it back. And so while money can enhance your life, your world should not revolve around it. Hopefully you take that away. And the key to long-term wealth is finding that balance between sort of that short-term, feeling good, doing things that you want to live your lifestyle now versus balancing the need of developing long-term wealth for the future. Now that we've talked about how emotions can affect the decisions that we make about our own money, how can we shift the paradigm in our favor? So let's take a few moments to explore some of the things that you can do to change the way that you think, feel, and act about money. Now on this list, you're going to see 12 different topics. And so we're not going to go into each of the different ways, but I like to say just in generality, the best ways to improve your relationship with money is the same way that you'd go about improving any relationship, through love. And you're probably saying, Bradley, that's crazy. What does love have to do with anything? The reality is you can't enjoy a good relationship with money unless you're willing to love it through thick and thin, through up and down, unconditionally. You've got to be grateful. You got to just be willing to embrace it for whatever it is, because at the end of the day, it's always going to be with you and you can't avoid it. And love is a choice and an intention, not only an emotion, but also a behavior. And so changing your behaviors when it comes to money can help you develop a healthier attitude towards your wealth. And your relationship with money will improve as long as you honor it in the same ways that you honor the important relationships in your lives with friends and with family. So again, I'm not saying money should overtake friends and family. All I'm saying is it's sort of in the same ballpark of a relationship in your life that you want to cultivate and foster over time. And yes, it might not be the healthiest relationship in the beginning, but just as you grow with someone as a friend, you grow with someone as a partner, you want to sort of grow to really love your money over time. And so I mentioned these 12 kind of topics here on the screen. I do want to talk about the last three because I think they're very important. The first one is recognizing the difference between what you want and what you need can really help you keep your spending aligned with your current financial situation as well as your overall financial objectives and goals, right? Think about it. Are you someone that says, I need to have that, I got to have that? You sort of get that impulse to buy something and you say, I'm going to get it, and you don't even think about it, right? Try to bifurcate between the needs and the wants. And when you start to do that, you'll realize that things that perhaps you need, like paying rent or getting groceries and insurance, those are things that obviously you can't do without. But something like getting, an extra pair of sneakers that you don't need, or buying the newest iPhone, or going to see, going on a lavish vacation, perhaps it's something that's a want, and that's great. I'm not telling you to change your lifestyle entirely, but once you get a grip on kind of what's a want versus a need, you're going to find yourself making a lot more healthy and rational decisions. The next one is seeking clarity to take the time to fully understand the situation before responding to it. And what that'll do is help avoid knee-jerk reactions or emotional responses. So perhaps you're about to pull the trigger on a big purchase in your life. Okay to take a step back, go take a shower, go exercise, go for a walk, go talk to someone, do something different, go back and see if you still feel the same sort of vigor and conviction about that decision as you kind of did in the moment when the energy and the adrenaline's picking up. And then finally, having faith in your long-term vision is particularly important. The fact is, markets are volatile and irrational, and your life can change in unexpected or unforeseen ways, right? If you just check the market day to day, hour to hour, and you're seeing the ups and downs with what's going on politically and with the pandemic, it's so easy to kind of just jump ship and change things out. But if you've got a long-term vision and you understand that, you're going to be able to deal with the ups and downs of the markets and the highs and lows of life, it'll help you stay the course and not look back and say, man, I really should have just stuck with the original plan. I shouldn't have just adjusted on the fly like that. So how do you avoid making knee-jerk reactions and stay focused sort of on the long-term vision? The first one is slow down your thinking and separate fact from fiction, and try to make decisions based on data and analysis rather than emotion and gut feeling. So I go back to the person who's at the casino and saying, I know it's going to be black again because I just have a good feeling. Well, maybe say to them, do you know what the statistics are? It's just slightly under 50%. Or maybe someone says, I actually think I'm doing a really good job saving. I feel like I'm putting enough money away towards my checking, saving, and investing accounts. Rather than doing that, actually take a look. Take your credit card statements, look at your salary, look at how much you're spending, look how much you're putting away, and see the cold, hard facts and numbers to back up the decisions that you're making. And that's where, like, a financial advisor, someone like me, or just having a third party can take a look sort of at your situation with clarity and objectivity and help you sort of filter through those decisions rather than you having to fly blind. And then also, it's important to align your spending and saving with your values and goals rather than your short-term wants. So having a concrete roadmap for managing your wealth will remove some of the emotion and more easily reveal some irrational biases that you have. So you can see on the screen, got a few different goals that you might have, and if you start to map those out, short, medium, and long term, you'll sort of find yourself grounded by a plan and have that discipline to stick to it rather than sort of saying, I'm going to sort of spend what I have and I'll figure it out when I get there. The next thing that you could do is talk to your family. I mentioned, talking about money with family can be awkward, and I'm not saying it's for everyone, but whether that's talking to a significant other of yours or a sibling or a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, but having meaningful family conversations about money, I think, is an essential part of any family wealth management strategy, especially as an increasing number of families are being sandwiched between taking care of their older family members, perhaps parents who are aging, living longer, with everything that's going on, and as well as their kids, right? You obviously have to manage your kids when that day comes. And so talking about money can be an empowering first step towards forming a healthy relationship with your wealth, and families that succeed in having these effective discussions about money are better equipped to find ways to use their financial capital to leverage the value of their family's intellectual and social capital. And so some of the things you might want to talk about, what does money mean to you? Why you've worked so hard to acquire it? What family history might be intertwined with its acquisition? What challenges and responsibilities accompany it? I think that's a great one to talk to your kids about, especially if sort of high school, college age, and what the family wants to accomplish with it, right? Where's money going to take us? Is it going to help us achieve our goals of, being able to retire at an earlier age and things like that? So these are just some starting talking points for you. Might be inappropriate based on your situation. Certain topics might be more relevant, but just some things to think about. Now, defining your goals and then developing a wealth management strategy that aligns with those goals is another way of changing the way that you think about money. Because when you set goals and then track your progress over time according to those goals, it'll help you set realistic expectations about your financial future. So if you're saying, I want to retire at 55, I want to afford, $1 million home, I want to have a second home, I want to, put my kids all through private school, all this, it's all well and good to have those goals, but if you do that, then you start putting some facts and figures behind it, you'll see what it actually will take to get there. And then perhaps you start to say, okay, maybe I need to scale that back. I'm going to have to prioritize some of these because I'm not going to be able to get there. And if I do want to make all those goals happen, something needs to change. Perhaps I need to bring in a little bit more income. I need to cut back on my expenses. Now, why do I say planning for the future is so important? Because expectations, what you think might happen, doesn't always line up with actual experience. And for example, 30 years of research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute has shown that nearly half of workers retire earlier than planned. So you're probably thinking, well, that sounds great. That means people are retiring earlier than they wanted. They can enjoy their, retirement. They can enjoy, doing whatever they want when they're younger. But remember, what that means is when you retire, is you're no longer bringing in that reliable stream of income. So perhaps you're forced into retirement earlier than you thought because your employer pushes you out or you have some sort of health issue. So what that means is you actually needed more money to save up before you got into retirement to help sustain you for a longer period of time. So all I'm getting at is you just want to make sure that you don't just assume that what you think is going to happen is what the actual experience is going to be, because it doesn't always add up. And you want to make sure you're prepared for that what if scenario. So one of the best ways to alleviate financial stress is to focus on saving. And here are some of my 4 best ways that I could recommend to you to put some extra money towards your savings. The first one is pay yourself first. This means transferring a portion of your salary to your savings first before you start to take care of optional discretionary expenses. So strategies like participating in your company's 401k, 403b, 457, depending on what organization you work for, or putting money towards an HSA, a healthcare savings plan, that allows you to put money away pre-tax, for medical expenses. That's a great way to sort of set yourself up for success because you don't even get the impulse to spend money that has already been put away that you can't touch without paying a penalty for taking it out too early. That's the first thing. Pay yourself first before it even hits your checking account. See what ways you can put that money away that it can't even be touched until it's time. The next one is trim spending by changing your habits. we all have regular habits like buying a morning latte or going out for lunch every day, spending more, perhaps day in and day out than we would like. And if you cut back on those, even if you, let's say, go out 3 times a week for coffee instead of 5 times, and instead you ground your own coffee, you get it at Trader Joe's, every small bit will start to add up. You might say, okay, Brad, what is $4 latte 3 times a week, $12 a week, over a whole year? It's not a ton of money, but as we'll see in a subsequent slide, right, when you put a little bit of money away over a long period of time, it really can grow if you let your money go to work for you. The next one is taking advantage of tax benefits, right? There are a number of ways that you might be able to decrease the amount of tax that you owe to Uncle Sam through personal and retirement savings. If you're a parent, you're starting to think about saving for college, through a 529 plan. It's a really great tax advantaged vehicle that I'm happy to talk to any of you about in more detail. But the point is there are ways through our IRS tax code to keep more of the money that you work so hard to earn, and therefore you can put more of that money towards your saving. And then finally, you can use one of the most important assets, which is time, to leverage the power of compound interest by saving earlier in life and taking advantage of the interest on your interest, or the earnings on your earnings. And I want to illustrate that in the following slide. Let's talk about compound interest. Albert Einstein once called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world. And so here's an example of what he meant. We've got 2 characters here. We've got John and Jane. They're both the same age at the time of the story starting. And they both decide they want to save $3,500 a year over a 25-year period. The difference is Jane starts at 25 and John says, you know what, I'm going to enjoy my 20s and 30s. I'm going to be a bachelor, just go live the life, go on lavish vacations, spend and do all that. When I get to 40 years old, I'll settle down. So Jane starts at 25 years old. She puts $3,500 away every single year from 25 to 50. John starts at age 40, puts $3,500 away for 25 years from 40 to 65. Jane, from 50 to 65 years old, just lets her money sit. So they put the same amount of money away for the same amount of years. The only difference is Jane starts 15 years earlier than John. And for this illustration, I'd like to assume about an 8% investment return. We're going to assume that they don't just put their money in cash, that they're actually investing it in the market in a diversified portfolio. We're going to assume they earn about 8% every year on their investment. And so what that looks like at the end of age 65, when they're both at 65, Jane's been saving for 25 years plus 15 of just letting it sit. John started at age 40. What you're going to get is Jane's looking at $811,000. She's almost 10x her money. John, on the other hand, he looks pretty good. He's tripled his money. He's looking at $255,000. But when you compare the two, even though they put in the same amount of money over time, Jane has more than 3 times the amount of money that John does. And so the point is, if you start early, every little bit counts. You're going to find yourself in a much better situation by letting sort of those earnings continue to compound on each other over time. And so if you haven't started saving already, it's not too late. But as these numbers demonstrate, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. And I always say the best time to start saving was yesterday. The second best time to start saving is today. Now, debt is a conversation that perhaps is uncomfortable for some people, but the reality is it's inevitable for most people. For example, your mortgage, right? That's what we call good debt. But however, it's important to take control of your debt so that your debt doesn't control you. And many of us find ourselves overextended at some point in our lives. That's just hard to avoid. It can happen because of reduced income. Perhaps you lost your job, or perhaps you have unusual expenses, maybe around Black Friday or Christmas. You spend a little bit more. You see your credit card statements a little bit higher, or you just overspend. Perhaps you have a period where you just see some things that you like and they all happen at the same time and you end up spending more than you like. So you have a little bit more debt. And sometimes the first response we have to having sort of debt continue to pile up is to deny it or attempt to justify it. But your debts don't have to be crushing or hopeless. They are a problem for which there is a solution. And so in general, some tips for you to kind of dig out of debt should be, just in general, stop borrowing. However painful it might seem, the first step to digging out of your excessive debt is to stop borrowing more. Start to think ahead and save up for major purchases and then pay in cash, rather than sort of being able to rely on taking out loans and paying more interest than you need to. What you'll find is you'll reduce the total cost of these purchases because you won't have to pay interest, thereby freeing up more cash to reduce your debt even further. Another one is, repaying the highest cost debt first. If you've got, let's say, a car loan, student loan debt, a different loan for your mortgage, right? You kind of have to balance, how do I pay all these off? It's a little bit more complicated than what I'm about to say, but the point is, if you're paying 6% interest in one place, 3% interest somewhere else, 2% interest in another place, maybe it makes sense to try to pay off more of that 6% debt as soon as you can, because that debt's going to obviously accumulate in interest a lot more. And then moving over to the right side of the slide, talking about credit cards. I mean, I don't think our parents have had as much of an issue of this as I think people in their 20s and 30s, myself included, have, which is back in the day before credit cards, you had to take a bill out of your pocket and feel the impact of handing it to your cashier and knowing what that felt like to not have it in your pocket anymore, which is now, with things like Uber, where you don't have to swipe a credit card. It's already in there. You swipe a credit card, you don't feel the impact, and you have auto pay set up. All these different things have compounded the fact that, we now have more credit card debt than every single debt pool except for student loan debt. And so ways to kind of cut back on credit card debt, right? Pay on time so you don't have to sort of pay those interest charges of not paying on time. Make sure you try to pay as much, if not all, of your credit card balance every month, that you don't, again, hurt your credit score and start to accumulate that interest. And then the last one is try to avoid impulse buying. Know yourself. If you're someone, you go to a mall with a credit card and you've got a couple hours and you're just going to walk store after store and swipe, and you're going to end up with, arms worth of bags, perhaps that's a day that you just take a couple $100 out of the bank and in cash, and you just say to yourself, I'm only going to spend the money that I'm bringing. I'm going to leave my credit card at home. Maybe you're someone that likes going to the casino. Rather than bringing a debit card with you, perhaps, just bring the cash. That way, for a fact, if you end up losing all your money, you come to grips with that, but you don't end up taking out more than you intended. And so those are some ways to avoid that impulse buying. Let's bring it all together, and we'll talk about, kind of ways that you can start to integrate this into your life today. So keep in mind that having sort of a goals-based strategy goes beyond just investments, right? When I talk about starting to grow your wealth and planning for the future, you don't want to just think about investing in the stock market. There's more to it. So goals-based wealth management is a holistic approach that concentrates on helping you build the life that you wish to lead. And so to do this, you want to think about different offerings that might be available, like, having insurance. God forbid you lose your life, and you want to make sure you leave, your family in a good shape, or you want to leave some money for, your heirs one day when you die of old age. You can set up, estate planning so you don't have to worry about what's going to happen. Making sure that you've got enough money, setting a budget for yourself so that you have the cash flow and you can meet your obligations to pay your rent or your mortgage, right? Philanthropy, if that's something that is important to you, giving money to charity, putting a plan in place to make sure that X% goes towards charitable contributions every month. So thinking about your sort of whole financial picture in one place is a really, really good place to start to have a healthy psychology about money. Now, whether you work with Morgan Stanley or not, we have sort of an investment approach to goals-based management that I think makes a lot of sense. Whether you work with a professional or not, I think you could integrate this into your own life as well. And so the first step is discover, right? Whether it's working with someone, if I were to work with you, I'd ask you questions to kind of uncover what is your current financial situation? What are your goals? What are you trying to get to out of life, both, personally, financially? What are some things that keep you up at night? So the first thing is talk to yourself, think introspectively, what are you trying to get out of your life? What are your goals? Where are you today? And how are you going to get there? The next one is, based on that, think about different and various scenarios that you could potentially take and what appropriate strategies might be for the different goals. The next one is implement, right? So think about different accounts that you might open. Perhaps for a down payment on a home in 6 months' time, you want to open a checking or savings account. But for your retirement, you want to make sure you have a traditional or Roth IRA, and you're going to invest those differently depending on what those different goals are that you have for how you're going to use the money. And then finally, this is so important when you put a plan in place to kind of give you comfort knowing that you've got a plan in place, is to track your progress. It's all well and good to have a plan, but if you don't monitor it and allow yourself to stay flexible and adapt to changing circumstances, you're going to find that your plan is going to become stale and obsolete. So you want to make sure that you can make adjustments according to your needs and life events and changing market conditions. So I want to make sure it's clear on that. That doesn't mean that you abandon ship right away. It doesn't mean that after a day of something going awry, you say we're abandoning this altogether. Refining your plan and tracking your progress to do that is a totally healthy activity. Completely discarding a plan because of sort of an up day, or you're just emotional one day or the market didn't do so well the other day, that's a really unhealthy habit that can lead you to making regrettable decisions. Now, if you're going to take anything out of this seminar here today, the important thing I want to convey to you is the important thing is to get started, right? These goals aren't getting any closer, and the longer you wait, the more difficult it can be to reach them. You saw the example of John and Jane, where John just said, you know what, I'll deal with it when I'm 40, I'll save the same amount as Jane. And you saw the difference that had on their long-term wealth. And in an increasingly complex and ever-changing world, having a plan and not having a plan and sort of saying, I'm just gonna, figure it out as I go, it's just not gonna cut it. And it's gonna sort of make you have some of the pitfalls that we spoke about earlier. And figuring it out on the fly, I've just seen, a lot of people end up coming to me in their 40s and 50s and saying, Brad, I really wish I had had sort of an education like what you're talking about in the seminar, because I made the same mistakes of just kind of flying blind and flying by the seat of my pants. And so understanding your psychology, going back to how we started this conversation, understanding your psychology, figuring out what your financial personality type is, looking at your financial situation, thinking about your goals. When you start to put all that together, you'll find that it's instrumental to setting you and your family up for long and sustained success. Now, I appreciate you all being here. As I mentioned, my name is Bradley Basker. I'm putting my contact information here. I'll also have Jenna send it out as a follow-up. For any of you that are interested in sort of doing a financial wellness checkup or doing some sort of consultation, feel free to ask me, for some time. We can set it up. We'll provide my website. You can schedule an appointment with me at absolutely no cost or obligation. And likewise, January happens to be Financial Wellness Month in the United States. So if you know anyone else that could perhaps use a financial wellness checkup, or any other organization you're part of beyond the WashU Alumni Network that would benefit from some sort of financial wellness seminar of this kind, please feel free to reach out. Happy to do these kinds of things in the community. And again, there's no charge for these kinds of seminars. I really just enjoy giving back. Now, if you enjoyed this seminar in particular, I do have a few more that are coming up, not affiliated with WashU, but again, open to the public and completely free of charge. Coming up next week, for any of you that are parents or aspiring parents, I have a seminar called Raising Money Savvy Kids. That's just sort of about putting strategies in place to talk to your kids about money so that perhaps they don't make the same mistakes that you did. So a lot of the stuff that I talked about here today, specifically from sort of a parent's lens. And then coming up later this month, I have two more topics that are very interesting. The first one is called Financial Freedom, Building Wealth to Live the Life That You Love. And that kind of goes a level deeper from what we spoke about today. We'll talk about sort of strategies for how to set up different accounts in your life, how to think about buying your first home, how to manage your finances now so that you can kind of be set up for the future. That's more of a holistic, nitty-gritty, let's get tactical in terms of building that wealth. So please feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in signing up for that. And then finally, again, for those people that are parents or thinking about becoming parents, 529 college savings plans, we talk about a great way to invest and save to potentially put your children, your grandchildren, or even yourself, as you'll learn if you attend, through the expensiveness of college. And it's something that I'd really highly recommend, especially for someone thinking about saving for their kids. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Jenna. I appreciate everyone's time and for being here, and I'd love to open up the floor for some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Bradley. That was a great presentation. I know I took quite a few things away from it, so I really appreciate that. We did receive a couple of questions that I want to get to, but feel free to continue asking through the Q&A function as I feed these to Bradley. So go ahead and start with an important one. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how important is it to have a budget, and any recommendations for apps or other tools to use to create the budget?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people feel like a budget is a burden. I just think of it more like a plan. And I don't think a budget is something that everyone has to have for the rest of their life. I just think it's a healthy sort of checkpoint for someone to put in place to just get started and sort of see the numbers, right in front of them. What are they bringing in versus what are they spending? And so I think it's very important to have a budget, at least at the outset, especially if you don't sort of know if you're doing the right things. A lot of people ask me, is there a conventional wisdom of how much I should be spending, saving, using, etc.? And what I typically like to say is the 50-30-20 rule. Again, it's going to be different for people. I hope some of these numbers are different for you on the back end, as I'll explain. But typically what I'd say is 50% of what you bring in should be sort of for essential expenses. 30% is what I'd say you could spend on discretionary things like going shopping, buying yourself clothes, perhaps just doing sort of more fun things. And then 20% to me is the minimum you should be putting away for another day. And so if you're lower than 20% right now, I would say look at that 30% and see, could I cut back on ways that I'm spending sort of discretionarily? And then the second thing you asked was, are there any good apps? Now, I would tell you Morgan Stanley Online has a great spending and budgeting tool. But if you're looking for one that's very popular outside of Morgan Stanley, I really recommend Mint. I think it's very easy to bring in a bunch of your different accounts, see it in one place. It shows you kind of what you spent versus what you brought in. And it's nice to have a snapshot rather than having to log into all these different websites to kind of figure out, how much money you have and how much you've spent, and looking at different credit card statements. So I think Mint is the best one that I've personally used before I obviously got exposed to Morgan Stanley, and I use Morgan Stanley now.
Yeah, great, thank you. And so another one is, when do you recommend starting the financial discussion with your kids? Is high school too early or too late?
That's an outstanding question. I would say I'll answer that, and I'd say join us next week for the Raising Money Savvy Kids, because I think I dive a lot more into when is appropriate to have that conversation. What I would say is it's going to depend based on the maturity of your own kid. I think high school is for sure an appropriate time. I was going to say, maybe even before high school, perhaps you start to talk to them about it. Maybe you put an allowance in place. But for someone in high school, I think that's a great time, because hopefully in the summers, they're starting to think about getting an internship or scooping ice cream or being a camp counselor. They're going to start to kind of have money in their pocket. And I really think it's important for parents to start to have their conversation with their kids about, earning something on their own and not just getting handouts from their parents all the time. And I think the natural parental instinct, and I'm already, feeling that as a parent with my newborn daughter, you just want to make everything so easy for them. You don't want them to have to struggle for anything. But if you want your kids to be money savvy and have those conversations, it's okay to make them work for things. I think in high school, especially in the latter half of high school, it's definitely an appropriate time to start to talk to them about the value of a dollar, putting their sweat equity into work so that they can earn something for themselves rather than just always relying on mommy and daddy.
Yeah, good advice. Thanks. And question we received in the registrations is, how do you create a balance when your partner has a different income or a different financial personality?
Yeah, I think that's actually something that we talk about in the financial freedom seminar, but it's a problem, unfortunately, because there are circumstances where people will hold sort of the fact that one of them has high earning power and the other one doesn't. There have many situations where one parent is a stay-at-home parent and the other one is the breadwinner, and I think it can create conflict in the relationship. Here's what I'll tell you, and here's once when I spoke to a financial advisor a few years ago, they spoke about this. I think this is the healthiest way to do it. For me, I'm not sure if it'll work for you, which is this. I say you create what we call a pillar account, where all of your direct deposits go in, everything that you make, regardless of whether one makes less than the other, everything goes into this pillar account. And this pillar account is going to be what's used to pay your expenses, your rent, your mortgage, groceries, all that. And then you come up and say, okay, 1% or 5%, I don't know what the number is that's appropriate for you. You're going to create your own individual checking accounts that the other partner does not have access to. Let's say you put 1% away, and that is money that each of you get to spend however they choose without any questioning from the other partner. That's money that for me, for example, would be going to a Red Sox game or, going out with my boys for a drink, as opposed to, my wife wants to go shopping or go on a getaway to, the Berkshires or something like that. I don't get to question that because that's in her discretionary account. But I know that in that pillar account where 95, 98% of our finances come from, we're sharing everything. We don't talk about what's yours and what's mine. It's kind of a shared mentality. I think that's the healthiest way to go about it. But I do think it's okay for a partner to have kind of privacy in a small respect when it comes to having some of those discretionary accounts. I just think breaking the ice, merging things as much as you can, starting to get away from the me versus you, I think that's a really healthy relationship to have.
Great, thanks. And another question is, I have a friend who is probably characterized as a flyer, but has goals to save more money, but was never really taught. So is there any advice I could give without sounding too forward in discussing money?
Yeah, listen, that's a great question. I think the thing with flyers is they are sort of like ignorantly blissful. And so you're in kind of a tough ballpark with, you don't want to push the envelope too much. What I would say is perhaps do some sort of, just do a little bit of basic math for them. Show them kind of what money would look like today if they put a certain amount in. You can even take that example I gave of John and Jane, where they each put different amounts in, and just show the difference with cold hard facts and some numbers, and show them what it would look like if they really prioritize it. And maybe that would just sort of give them that epiphany, that light bulb will go off, that, maybe I should care a little bit more about this, because there's going to be a huge disparity in where I'm going to end up in the future. I think talking in sort of generalities and in broad terms about, you really should care about this, this is important, it's not necessarily going to click with the flyer. I think if you put something in front of them that shows them, here's the difference between sort of caring about it, but actually putting your money where your mouth is, and sort of caring about it and starting that process much earlier, here's where you're going to end up in terms of the two different endpoints. I think that might click and might sort of open their eyes to perhaps being a little bit more conscious about that.
I know I'm personally a saver. So when I hear someone's a flyer, I'm like, I have no idea how you could be a flyer, but I know there's people out there. So this would be actually our last question, unless we get any more while I ask. But if you are well-versed in income-based loan repayment plans or public service loan forgiveness, and how to balance student loan debt with wanting to save more for retirement.
Yeah, listen, student loan debt is a complicated topic to talk about. What I would say is, it's going to depend on kind of what interest rate you're paying on your student loan debt. I have been, as I do more research about it, as student loan debt is such a big thing in the U.S., I've been doing more research and discovered that, you do have the ability to sort of, if you needed to skip payments, I believe it doesn't hurt your credit score. So there's a little bit more flexibility with student loan debt than there is with a lot of other loans that you would have. So what I would say is you do want to balance the two. I think, if you're someone that's potentially trying to save up for your first home, but you also have student loan debt, a lot of people say, should you do one or the other? What I would say is, you can't do both and you can't sort of pay off as much as you can regularly and sort of put money away. What I would say is try to just go 50-50 if you can. Go with the minimum student loan debt so that you don't sort of get penalized and the interest doesn't accrue more than it normally should. But I think there is a way for you to balance both of them. In terms of income repayment, if you are someone that is sort of on the cusp of making good money, perhaps you're a medical student that took out a lot of medical school debt, but you're going to be making good money coming out, I think an income repayment system is great, because you don't sort of have to feel a burden when you don't have all that money. But when you start to make good money, yes, more of it's going to be coming out to paying back that debt, but you're going to have that comfort knowing you've got that income coming in the door and you don't have to worry about, making ends meet anymore. So again, it's a complicated topic, and happy to talk more about this with any individuals offline.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Bradley, for participating in today's event. And in the survey, you guys will have information on how to reach out to Bradley if you indeed have more questions. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up a little early and give you all back the gift of time, and look forward to seeing all of you again soon for a future program. And additionally, we encourage you to visit the digital resources and virtual connections page on our website to learn more about ways to connect with WashU alumni, students, and faculty. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you, Bradley, for putting on this great presentation, and have a good evening, everyone.